Hello dear learner, I welcome you to the lecture 4 of week 2, and Theodore Adorno is the topic of today's lecture. As we already know that he is one of the most important thinker of the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory. So, first of all we will understand who is Adorno and we will study about his life and his background. Then we will start understanding his viewpoints on various topics on which he has written extensively. First, we will understand his views on reason, then we will understand what is myth versus scientific reasoning, then we will understand the influences of Karl Marx on his ideas, and ultimately what are his contributions as a critical theorist. Then we will understand his viewpoints on modernity and whether he was making a critique of modernity from certain perspective or from some new perspective that will also be dealt with, and we will finally understand his concept of enlightenment. So, with these topics we will be actually ending today's lecture, and in the next lecture we will be continuing with the critique of enlightenment and his other views on topics which he has actually dealt with in his various writings. So, the most important fact about Theodore Adorno is that he was associated with the Institute for Social Research, which is also known as Frankfurt School, who was responsible for developing the famous critical theory. It is a philosophical form which is actually titled as critical theory. He joined the Institute for Social Research in the year 1945 and became director of the Frankfurt School in the year 1958. He was the student of Walter Benjamin, who was also one of the very notable thinker of the critical theory tradition, who was also greatly influenced by the ideals of Frankfurt School. Although he wrote on a wide range of subjects, his fundamental concern was human suffering, especially what was the effect of modern society on human conditions. So, we will see what were those sufferings about which he was so much concerned. He was a musicologist who had studied with great composer Alban Berg and was deeply influenced by Arnold Schoenberg. He was also a philosopher and a social theorist. He was skeptical of all systems and understandings of narratives. He refused to identify individual with collectivity. He was influenced most notably by Hegel, Karl Marx and Nietzsche. And the greater part of Adorno's thought, his account of reason, his understanding of the role of consciousness in the constitution of reality, and his vision of domination and human suffering are all imbued within the thoughts of these earlier philosophers. So, you can see that a wide range of philosophers and their philosophies have influenced the ideas and thinking of Adorno. So, we will also see in some detail the influences of these great thinkers and philosophers on the ideas or on the political philosophy of Theodore Adorno. Now, we have just seen and we know that he was influenced by Marx and he was associated with the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory, which had a Marxist perspective to understand the social realities and the operation in the society. But we must always remember that he expanded the horizon of the Marxist perspective and he broadened it to the area of sociology, then psychology and art. He rejected the one-sided scientific materialism of Karl Marx. He was also a critique of mass culture, which was a product of mass society, which characterized the modern capitalist society. Now, we know that his writings include one of the very important texts of the, you can say, the Frankfurt School, or a very important text of critical theory, which is titled The Dialectic of Enlightenment, and this he has co-authored with Max Horkheimer. Then Minima Moralia, which was published in 1951, and Negative Dialectics in the year 1966. He died in 1969, just prior to the publication of his another very important work, which is titled Aesthetic Theory. Now, let us start with his views on reasons. What we meant by the reason as it was used in the Enlightenment tradition, and why he made a critique of the reason or the Enlightenment reason, because he believed that the reason has degenerated into instrumental rationality. Now, what we mean by instrumental rationality? Instrumental rationality means using reasons as an instrument to gain power and to dominate nature and other individuals. So, basically the reason which was meant for emancipation and which was meant for bettering the conditions of human beings was turned into an instrument or as a justification to dominate over other individuals and to dominate over nature and to gain power and to justify many such acts which have proved to be detrimental to the human well-being. And therefore, he was a critique of instrumental rationality. He was influenced by the thinking of Nietzsche, who said that reason brings mastery and mastery is power. So, you can see the connection which has been established between the reason, then mastery, and finally the acquisition of power, that how reason is used as an instrument to gain mastery and ultimately to gain power and to dominate over other beings. And one of the very important example of the use of the instrumental rationality has been the domination over nature. We have been talking about this so many times in our earlier lectures when we were dealing with the important elements of critical theory, or when we were talking about the ideas of Max Horkheimer, and in the lectures to come we will be talking about the notion of the ecological democracy and the eco-citizenship, where we will describe in detail that how much ecological devastation has occurred because of the Western capitalist model of development. So, again and again this point is coming because this has been a common line of thinking amongst all the critical theorists. So, when reason is used to dominate nature, it leads to so much of exploitation and destruction of nature. So, when we will try to understand the meaning of enlightenment or the concept of enlightenment in the words of Adorno, then we will understand in much more detail that why the so called the rationality or the instrumental rationality has been misused or used to dominate nature, because it is based on certain ideals and principles which actually allows such domination. Now, with this type of instrumental rationality, Adorno argued individual projects a feeling of self onto the nature, because ultimately what we feel and believe inside, we also do it in our actions. So, in our thoughts, or which is you can say the embodiment of our self, if we are having this type of reasoning to dominate nature, or we think that the human beings are the supreme species who is having the power to dominate over other beings, to exploit the nature, then this same self or this feeling is projected onto the nature, because what we have in our thoughts, it gets translated into action. So, this projection of feeling of self into the nature is getting, or it gets reflected in multiple forms of exploitation and devastation in the society and on the nature. Now, Adorno made a very important distinction between myth and scientific reasoning, and ultimately how scientific reasoning itself becomes a myth. So, contrary to the belief, we say that scientific reasoning is superior to myth, and especially with the advent of the modern era, we could help in understanding, or we could understand the world with the help of scientific reasoning. With the development of science and technology, with a mindset of inquiry, experimentation, we could understand and analyze everything with the help of certain methods and also certain principles. But unfortunately, the scientific reasoning which was used to replace our understanding of the world around us, which was earlier done with the help of certain myths or certain arguments or reasoning, or that it may be a superstitious beliefs. So, it was thought that now we are able to understand the world with the help of scientific reasoning. But unfortunately, what happened? This same scientific reasoning which was used to dissolve all the myths, it itself became a myths, and therefore, you can say that the achievements of enlightenment, or the so called the promise of hope and the promises which were made by enlightenment, they were lost. Now, both modes create a viewpoint that the subjective must conform to an outside world to which it has no control. So, whether it is a myth or whether it is a scientific reason, in both the cases there is an outside agency or certain outside control which is trying to dictate how we should feel and how we should actually think and perceive a particular situation. So, therefore, this external control of our subjectivity is not a welcome development. So, within this argument, Adorno's views on morality has to be understood, which got struck in this powerless so called subjectivity. So, this subjectivity which is subjected to external control over which the self is having no control, then it becomes powerless. And when it becomes powerless, then what happens? Then he says that even the morality, it gets struck into this powerless subjectivity, because this powerless subjectivity, it has lots of impact on the human morality, because now only the facts which can be verified, they are recognized as meaningful. Morality becomes nihilistic, which means that it has lost all its utility in the society. It carries no meaning, and it becomes a mere prejudice of individual subjectivity. So, the morality which are meant to guide the human society, which are meant to guide the human conduct, it gets reduced to merely prejudices or the personal biases of the individual. So, this powerlessness of the subjectivity, it gets reflected in terms of the morality which had earlier guided our society, and which is also very, very important. Now, a very important term which has been coined by Adorno, and that is the type of thinking which has developed in the modern society, and it is known as identity thinking. Identity thinking denotes a type of thinking in which everything becomes an abstract and nothing individual in its actual unique, you can say, specificness is not allowed to exist. So, the point which Adorno is trying to make is that the identity thinking is an abstract type of thinking where there is no individual uniqueness or individual viewpoints or the specificities of the individual which are required to make a rich thinking. So, it becomes a just type of thinking which is characterized by homogeneity and not some type of diversity. It is very contemplated that reason was supposed to be used to end domination in the society, but on the contrary, reason itself has become entangled with domination. So, the same argument has been given again, that we had lots of hope on reason, on enlightenment reason, that it will help in the establishment of a society which is free from domination and all forms of oppression. but unfortunately this reason itself became an instrument of domination, it itself became an instrument of suppression in the society. So, therefore, it has become a tool and device for domination and suffering. So, this is a very unfortunate happening which is associated with the modern age. Now, we will try to understand Adorno's position and contribution as a critical theorist and what are the influences of Karl Marx on his theory. Now, Adorno was influenced by the Marx notion of the commodity fetishism. Now, what we mean by fetishism? Now, commodity fetishism is a Marxist philosophical concept that describes economic relationship as social relationship between things and not people. So, everything is being reduced to commodity, where we try to analyze social and economic relations not between individual, but actually between things or commodities. So, giving importance to the commodities, or we can say that raising the height or importance of commodity to the level of God is also one of the meaning of this concept. So, capitalist economic system has overtaken all areas of the society, which is associated with the phenomena of the commodity fetishism. Now, the advanced capitalist system have led to reification and alienation of individual in the society. Now, this has been analyzed and explained by Karl Marx to various other post Marxist thinkers and also neo Marxist thinkers, because these two phenomena are one of the very unique and distinct phenomena of the modern society. Alienation has led to the estrangement of human beings, not only from his own self, but also from his own labor, and then from his own fellow beings, and also from the society in which he or she lives. And there has been also multiple forms of alienation in the society, and it has been found that even the capitalist, even the businessman, even the bureaucrats and managers, they are also facing the problems of alienation. Sometimes even we do not know that we are facing the problem of alienation in the society. Reification has been the use of human beings as instruments, as means to achieve certain ends. So, this use of individual as a means to an end has never been approved by any of the liberal theorists, and that individuals, Kant has said that individuals should be considered as end and not as means. But unfortunately, in the modern society all these values have been neglected and sidelined, and it has led to misuse or use of individuals for the purpose of exploitation in terms of various fields and dimensions. Now, capitalist system creates vast inequalities in the system, which leads to so much of suffering. Now, this human suffering was also a very important concern of Adorno, and he has explained in much detail how the capitalist system in terms of various types of domination have actually increased human suffering. Now, this is a contradiction, because on the one hand we argue and we actually say that the Enlightenment tradition with the coming of modernity, it has relaxed and it has made our life so comfortable, and on the other hand we find that it has increased human suffering to such great level. So, why such contradiction exists? Now, that is a point which was the concern and which he was exploring in his writings. Now, capitalism have created a dehumanizing system, which has also been argued by Karl Marx, how it in manifold ways it dehumanizes the human beings. When we say that the modern capitalist system is trying to dehumanize the human being, we mean that it is actually robbing of the human essence. The so called capitalist system, because of the inhuman and cruel conditions of work, robs the human being of his human essence. And what is the human essence? Human essence is to create, human essence is to innovate, human essence is to take pride in his activities, in his job, in his creation. So, those things are totally absent from the type of work the laborer or the worker is doing in the capitalist system. So, it leads to dehumanization besides the economic exploitation which he is facing on account of the very small number or amount of wages which he is getting. Now, he agreed with Karl Marx that exchange value is a key determinant of one's worth in the capitalist system. So, everything is determined by market and market is determined by exchange relations. So, everything can be brought and sold in the market, and the exchange value is actually the determinant of the value of a commodity. So, it is immaterial how much of labor has been spent or what type of values have been associated with it, but actually what is important is the exchange value, and this exchange value is unfortunately also one of the key determinant of one's worth in the capitalist system. So, we know that the worth of the individual is actually determined by whether he is able to make profit and able to succeed in the society as per the norms and standards created by the capitalist system. So, even the standards of success and failure have been created by the so called norms and precepts of the capitalist system, and everything is actually evaluated in terms of the money worth of an individual. So, therefore, he was suspicious of those accounts of liberalism that was founded upon abstract notions of formal equality and prioritization of economic and property rights. So, he was very apprehensive because these so called rights, whether it is economic rights or political rights, which were formal in nature, they were abstract, and he was not sure whether such accounts of equality were able to address the various forms of injustices and exploitations which were actually taking place in the name of abstract and free notion of individuals. Now, Adorno's account of domination was deeply indebted to Marx's account of domination. So, how Karl Marx has analyzed domination in terms of the domination of the capitalist over the proletariats, and how the capitalist actually uses the state machinery to exercise its dominance over the so called proletariat class is well known. So, he has been inspired and he has borrowed his account of domination from Karl Marx's theory of domination. Now, let us understand Adorno's viewpoints on modernity. Adorno, as we all know, that he was anti-modernist. He made a critique of modernism, and who along with Max Horkheimer co-authored a very important work, Dialectic of Enlightenment, in the year 1947, where he has made a very intensive critique of modernity. Some scholars have argued that in its critique of Enlightenment ideals and practices, now this work constitutes a precursor to postmodernity, because postmodernity came much later. But this work, which was published in the year 1947, it made a critique, a very in-depth critique, a very thought-provoking critique of modernity, and therefore, many scholars, they believe that actually this book was a precursor to the postmodernity or the postmodernism which came much year later. Now, modernity has made lots of promises of development, growth and prosperity, but in reality it has caused so much of destruction, as is manifest in Holocaust. The ways in which various types of violences and the various types of genocide was practiced in the interwar periods, that itself actually illustrates that somewhere these grand narratives, grand ideologies, or so called the precepts of modernity have failed to check the occurrence of events like Holocaust. Now, androcentric, universalist, abstract principles have promoted multivarious forms of domination in the society, because this so called androcentric perspective, which is based on the centrality of man in the matter of any approaches, and also the so called universalistic and abstract principles, they have actually undermined the various forms of domination, and in fact, under the guise of these abstract principles or androcentric principles, multifarious forms of domination have been practiced. For example, we know how the gender operation has been practiced in the society by the adoption of various andro perspectives. So, we have so many examples to illustrate that how these abstract universalistic principles have led to actually a type of domination in the society. Now, it has led to various types of domination, and some of them are: first, it has led to domination of man over nature. Now, there is no doubt that you can say the well-being and the welfare of human beings was at the center of the so called modernity project, and it was believed that man can dominate nature and extract the resources for its own development and well-being. And the entire progress of human civilization is based on that it is excessive exploitation of nature and its so called resources. And the second is, it has led to domination of man over his fellow beings. How multifarious forms of inequalities, exploitative practices have occurred across the world, and it establishes that it is not simply the domination of man over nature, but domination of man over his fellow beings. And the third and the most important, which is alarming also, it has led to domination over man's inner essence. So, when you try to dominate over man's nature and when you intrude into his basic essence, then it continuously and it actually makes a complete transformation of the individual itself when he is not able to think, because of the change in his nature, his mode of thinking will also change, and he will not be able to demand for change, and he will not be able to raise voices against the system or the society. Now, what was the concept of enlightenment which was given by Adorno? Now, in their work which is titled Dialectic of Enlightenment, Adorno and Horkheimer conceive of enlightenment as principally a demythologizing mode of apprehending reality. For them, the fundamental aim of enlightenment is the establishment of human sovereignty over material reality, over nature. Enlightenment is founded upon the drive to master and control nature, and the realization of this aim requires the ability to cognitively and practically manipulate the material environment in accordance with our will. Now, this paragraph, it illustrates the basic fundamental tenets of the enlightenment tradition and how that has led to the exploitation of nature. You can see the various part of this paragraph which highlights one of the important aspects of the enlightenment tradition. And the first part, it says that enlightenment, which was principally, it was conceived as a mode of comprehending reality to demythologize, that means to actually you can say to destroy all the myths and to understand the reality from a scientific perspective. And one of the fundamental aim of enlightenment was to establish human sovereignty or the supremacy of individual over the material reality, means over the world. They wanted to establish the human sovereignty or the supremacy of individual, and it was not simply limited to the material reality, but it was also extended to nature. So, enlightenment is founded upon the drive to master and control nature. You just see the underlying beliefs and the assumptions of enlightenment, that it was founded upon the belief or the drive to master and to control nature. And to realize these aims, it was felt necessary to cognitively and practically manipulate the material environment. So, at the level of knowledge, at the level of practice, at the level of methods, at every level it was required to manipulate the environment in accordance with our will, which means in accordance with the human will. So, with this basic idea of the domination and the supremacy of human beings over the so called other spaces in the environment has been responsible for so much of exploitation and domination of nature, which has led to, in a way, lots of ecological devastation. So, in the next lecture, we will actually understand that what are the important critiques of Enlightenment tradition, and besides that we will also understand his notion of the dialectics of reason, and we will also see the influences of Hegel and Nietzsche on his political philosophy. Besides that, we will also try to understand his viewpoints on the culture industry or the critique of culture industry. Besides that, we will study some more other aspects of his political philosophy in our next lecture on Theodore Adorno. So, therefore, I come to the end of this lecture, followed by certain questions which are related to the topics which has been covered today. What are Adorno's views on instrumental rationality? Explain contributions of Adorno as a critical thinker. How enlightenment has itself turned into a myth. So, with that, I come to the end of this lecture. Hope you have enjoyed it. Thank you very much.